few years ago, when I still lived in upstate New York, something really freaky happened to me. If you've ever been to upstate New York during the winter, you would know that it can snow a lot. I usually just spent snowy nights watching TV. I lived about a mile or so from any other house, and my roommate was out. Now, I'll be honest, being alone made me feel uncomfortable. I've always had an overactive imagination, and a small noise would really freak me out. Like I was saying, my roommate was out, and it was snowing heavily. It was probably like 9 or 10 at night, and I was watching TV like normal. All of a sudden, I heard a crunch outside, like someone stepping on ice. I immediately tensed up, and my mind raced to every possibility. It wasn't my roommate, since I didn't hear a car. I listened in horror as I could hear the crunches getting louder. I ran into my room and locked the door. I got out my shotgun, and I grabbed my phone ready to call 911. Just in case. I know it might seem like I was overreacting, but remember, this is at night in heavy snow, miles away from any other house. Who could possibly be outside? The footsteps just stopped at some point. I eventually fell asleep, and when I woke up, my roommate was back. I went outside to see if I could find any evidence of who was outside, and what I found still haunts me. I saw footprints in the snow coming out of the woods and circling around my house. The footprints were filled in for the most part, so it was hard to figure out where they were going. The scariest part of all this is that the footprints stop outside my bedroom window. The other footprints were a bit filled in, but these were fresh. It's as if someone had been standing there all night since the snow stopped early in the morning. To this day, it still scares me. I don't know what kind of person would be out in those woods. The fact that while I was in my room, they were standing outside my window still freaks me out. I moved out of that house a few months later. Please drop a like and subscribe for more scary stories. I was driving through the snow-covered expanse of Montana on McDonald Pass, minding my own business behind a grey Toyota Tundra. The dude was speeding and handling the icy road like a seasoned pro, but he must have been unfamiliar with how steep the final few miles were. Feeling like a responsible driver, I decided to ease off the gas and stay at 35, letting the Tundra drift ahead. It was all cool until, not even 5 minutes later, I stumbled upon a sight that sent shivers down my spine. I passed his tire marks etched in the fresh snow, leading off the side of the mountain. So I pulled over, my curiosity mixed with a growing sense of dread. Peering over the edge, I discovered the grey Toyota was now a twisted, upside-down inferno about 300 yards down the slope. I quickly dialed 911, heart pounding as I reported the accident. The operator assured me help was on the way. I waited there in the eerie silence of the snowy night, staring at the fire and smoke from the burning truck. The flames flickered against the white landscape like some hellish dance. I wanted to help the person right away, but I was afraid that the vehicle might blow up. I also thought it might be dangerous without the proper equipment and training to descend there. After what felt like an eternity, the distant wails of sirens broke through the quiet. The firemen and rescue team arrived, and they managed to pull the driver from the wreckage. The guy was alive, but he suffered terrible burns. In early 2007, I was on an alpine tour in the Wapta ice fields in Alberta, Canada. The conditions were not good when we set out. There was heavy snowfall, extremely high winds, and temperatures around -20 degrees Celsius. That's about -4 degrees Fahrenheit. We started by skiing up to the Bow Hut. That's an alpine club of Canada, a self-supporting hut way up on the toe of the glacier, and proceeded to wait out the storm. It took another full day before the skies cleared enough so we could venture up to the ice fields themselves. On the third day, we set out across the ice fields and made the Gordon Summit, one of the highest mountains surrounding the ice fields. On the way back, we made a little detour, climbing up one of the slopes to catch a few lines heading back to the hut. My friend made the first few cuts at the top before heading down on the right side of the major convex of the slope. No problems. I decided to follow, heading across the convex and head down the left fall line. That was my first idiot mistake. Well, on my first big cut across the face, past the theoretical shear point, the theoretical shear point became a real shear point. I felt the entire slope begin to move under me. The next few seconds were a complete blur. I remember staying on top for a few seconds before being violently ragdolled down the slope a few hundred feet before coming to a rest. Whatever you might think about response time, generally, there is none. I think I had a split second of control before I was gone, but there was nothing I could do to prevent myself from getting sucked in. Fortunately, we all had beacons, and my ski ended up sticking out right near where I had gone under. I was completely disoriented for the first few seconds of being still, but I remember coming fully around and realized it was very dark. The snow was very close to my face. Whether it was disorientation or the adrenaline kicking in, I did not completely panic. I was able to control my breathing at the beginning, but seconds literally felt like hours when you're buried under the snow. It didn't help that I remembered your odds of survival drastically go as low as 1 in 5 if you're buried for at least 30 minutes. I really did start to panic when I realized I might not survive. It was dark and cold, and I was breathing heavily, but I was taking no air. I couldn't tell which way was up and was starting not to feel my limbs. I remember feeling sleepy. A few moments, or an eternity later, I heard some muffled noise and felt some movement on the snow above me. Shortly, I got uncovered by 2 of my friends who saw me go down. In the end, I was under the snow for a few minutes. I sustained a few cracked ribs, a bruised chest, a sprained elbow, a mild concussion, and a pretty sore neck for a few weeks. It was really a different experience than I thought it might have been. Doing a fair bit of backcountry skiing, you think about avalanches a lot, but the reality is a lot different than what your mind makes it out to be. There is no time to react for the most part, and when you are under the snow, you quite literally cannot move at all. It's just like being encased in cement, and it is very frightening once the realization sets in. I was heading back home with my family after visiting some relatives next town. My stepdad wanted me to get used to driving in winter highway conditions, so he asked me to take the wheels. The plan seemed solid since the storm wasn't supposed to hit until later that evening. Snowflakes started falling as we left. Not a big deal, as I was comfortable driving in some snow. However, things escalated quickly. About 10 minutes into the drive, we found ourselves in the midst of a complete whiteout. Picture this. It's 8 p.m. in the middle of January, pitch black, and we're cruising along Canadian highways with only our headlights cutting through the darkness. There were no streetlights there, just the glow from our car. I'm doing my best not to freak out. My stepdad is beside me, attempting to guide me and find a safe spot to pull over, but the swirling snow makes it nearly impossible to see the road's edges. I've got 2 major concerns at this point. First, being in the left lane, I'm worried that if I pull over, I might misjudge and end up in a snow-filled ditch. Second, I can't make out the lane lines. If I keep driving, I might accidentally drift into the wrong lane. So, my only option is to keep driving until I'm absolutely sure it's safe to pull over. I'm relying on the rumble strips as my guide, creeping along at 30 kilometers per hour in a 90 zone. That's about 20 miles per hour. My stepdad suggests heading to the road where his parents live for a safer stop. Along the way, we pass 8 cars stranded in ditches. The road becomes completely obscured at some point, and even the rumble strips vanish. This leaves me to rely on pure instinct. Suddenly, I hit a patch of ice. Our car spins into the oncoming lane, and I quickly correct course. I sigh in relief that I realized my mistake just on time. My mom in the back seat is losing it, while my stepdad is doing his best to stay calm without grabbing the wheel in a panic. He's surprisingly less chill than me. Visibility is practically zero. Finally, we reach his parents' road and pull over. We decide to switch drivers. Stepping out of the car, I'm greeted by snow up to my shins. Staying at my grandparents' place for the night is a no-brainer, as there's no way we'd survive the journey home. About 15 minutes later, we find out that the highways are closed due to poor conditions. The next morning, we had to dig our way out of the house. I get a day off from school and stuck out of town while everyone else has to trudge in. It was my first winter driving with my learner's permit, and there had to be a blizzard, of course. If we'd had a smaller car, we wouldn't have made it to my grandparents' place. Terrifying as it was, I refused to let my parents see my fear, especially with my mum already on edge. In hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have been behind the wheel that night, but it turned out to be a crash course in handling challenging drives. A few years ago, my friend and I were staying in a small cabin during winter. It was on a remote piece of land owned by my dad in the Idaho wilderness. The nearest town was probably 50 miles away, and the nearest active road that wasn't an old logging road was about 2 miles from the cabin. It was about midnight. We had turned off the lantern and were trying to fall asleep when we heard what sounded like something had scraped the door. We both lifted our heads and I whispered, "Did you hear that?" My friend whispered yes back. Then, in the middle of nowhere, in this remote cabin, someone starts knocking on the door. Whoever or whatever it is, it doesn't say anything. It just knocks. We were both in our 30s, but we were so scared shitless we didn't say anything. The knocking continued for about a full minute, and it stopped. We thought it was over. Then we heard the same thing again at the cabin's back door. First, something seemed to scrape against it, and then there was knocking. We just lay there with our heads up, staring at the door. After a few moments, the knocking stopped. We didn't go out until it was light out again, and there was nothing near the door that would have tapped against it. There were no animal tracks and no prints on the snow. It freaks me out even thinking about it. And we've just listened to 5 true winter horror stories. Please leave a like and subscribe. As always, thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.